Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Wanderlust Wednesdays. 2024 is the 80th anniversary of D-Day. That day, June 6th of 1944, when 160,000 Allied troops landed on the beaches of Normandy, where they began the liberation of Europe. And to commemorate that momentous occasion, we have put together a program that spent some time in England, in London to be specific, and in Portsmouth, then crosses the Channel and focuses on the Normandy landing beaches for 2 days during a Seine river cruise. Before we start, let's take you back with a little video to that very day.
The peace and tranquility of this French coastline belies its turbulent past.
It was along these Normandy beaches that the course of world history changed forever. On June 6, 1944, the Allies landed.
Facing imposing terrain, stormy weather, and near constant enemy fire, more than 150,000 troops fought their way ashore. Today, reminders of the D-Day battle line the coast. An exploration of Normandy's rugged shores serves as a stark reminder of the daunting odds those young soldiers faced in their quest to free Europe. Omaha Beach was the scene of D-Day's most intense combat. Amid the mined hedgehogs and machine gun fire, thousands of brave soldiers fell in their quest to control this 5-mile-long beach. Point du Hoc, overlooking vital coastline, posed a massive threat. Army rangers scaled 100-foot cliffs to reach it and fought 2 days to hold it. This labyrinth of bunkers and bomb craters is a vivid window into the past. Of Normandy's sites, perhaps none is more significant than this one. We're at the American Military Cemetery near Omaha Beach in France. This is the final resting place of almost 10,000 young American soldiers. It's a place that must never be forgotten. Spanning 172 acres, the cemetery serenely honors these brave young men, most of whom lost their lives during D-Day operations.
The Normandy American Cemetery is actually located right above the battlefield here on Omaha Beach. On 6 June, this was a scene of absolute carnage. This place, it provokes deep thought and contemplation. You have to stop and think, how many places in the world can you go and stand and look and realize that the course of human history changed right here?
Learning about the D-Day landings is important for all generations, and having time to experience the American Military Cemetery, quiet solitude of the memorial, and the Garden of the Missing gives the chance for all to pay respects to those that gave their lives so that we could live.
Here in this place, where the West held together, let us make a vow to our dead. Let us show them by our actions that we understand what they died for. Strengthened by their courage, heartened by their value, and borne by their memory, let us continue to stand for the ideals for which they lived and died.
Before we get into the details, let me give you an overview of this itinerary. We start off with 3 nights in London, where you have the occasion to see some of the sites that played a major role in the Allied war effort. Then, with the Eurostar, we take you under the Channel, through the tunnel, to Paris, where you board your ship. After some time in Paris, we then start sailing downriver, past Vernon, and that is where Monet's gardens can be found, to Rouen. And Rouen becomes the jump-off point for a number of excursions that you can take to visit as much or as little of the Normandy beaches as you wish. Upon our return from Rouen, we visit the Château Gaillard in Les Andelys, and then you have a final day in and around Paris where we focus a little bit on Château Versailles. And then it's on to either home or to some extensions. This is what it looks like on a map. So here you have it. That squiggly dotted line is the train, of course, from London to Paris. I'm not sure that it is entirely accurate, but it looks great. And then on the Seine, you can see that you basically go back and forth between Paris and Rouen. And the beaches are a little bit of a drive. It's about an hour or so to bring you from Rouen to Gold Beach, Omaha Beach, Juno Beach, and other sites that are associated with the Allied war effort on June 6th. So let's delve into the details then, shall we? Upon your arrival in London, depending on how much time you still have in this city, you may want to go for a walk, visit a museum, do some shopping, have a nice meal. The next morning we take you to Portsmouth. Portsmouth is a city on the southern coast of England, and it played a very crucial role in the preparation for the D-Day landings. That has everything to do with the fact that in Portsmouth there are the naval dockyards. So it was a natural place with the military installations that were already there to expand and to set up shop to plan one of the greatest military operations of the 20th century. We will bring you to the Golden Lion pub, and that sounds a little strange, but that is where the main protagonist, the architects of the D-Day landings, would meet in the evenings to maybe do some more shop talk, but also to relax a little bit. As you can imagine, this was a very stressful time. All this preparation had to be done absolutely meticulously. There were different characters involved. It was, as I mentioned, it was a very exciting time. Then we will also bring you to the D-Day Museum in Portsmouth, which is small, very poignant, has a number of pieces of equipment, tanks, landing vehicles. It also chronicles the story of the preparation. The next day in London, you will be visiting the Churchill War Rooms. They're underground and they're surprisingly large. This is where Winston Churchill ran his government during the years of the Blitz. The constant bombardments of London made it unsafe to spend a lot of time above ground, and it's really an incredible job that they've done to create this museum while at the same time leaving the infrastructure entirely intact. You walk through these dimly lit corridors, you essentially see Churchill's desks as if he's just stepped out for a little while, and it chronicles at the same time that very crucial part of history. In the afternoon, after a visit to Covent Gardens, you visit the Imperial War Museum. And then the next day, there is a third visit that is closely linked to the Allied war effort. You visit Bletchley Park, a number of buildings, and what you see here in this slide is the main building in a compound, if you will, a little north of London, where in secret from 1938 on, members of MI6 and the Government Code and Cipher School were on a secret mission to crack codes of German military communications. They had the infamous Enigma code that was eventually cracked by a team under Alan Turing, and this has been depicted quite recently in a movie with Benedict Cumberbatch and Keira Knightley in a movie called The Imitation Game. And then it's on to Paris. You take the Eurostar through the Channel under the English Channel, and you will then be able to check into your stateroom. The ship is at the Quai de Grenelle, not far from the Eiffel Tower, and all that you need to do on this day is just go for a stroll along the Seine. And just like London, Paris is one of those cities where you will always want to return because there's never enough time. And that's okay. Choose wisely is my advice. Pick a handful of things, not too many, so that you don't rush yourself and have the feeling that time is always short. Just pick. One of the things that I would always do is make sure that you have enough time to eat the food. Eat the food. The Musée d'Orsay is a museum that is dedicated very much to the art of the late 19th, early 20th century. It's where all the great impressionists can be found, where a lot of Art Nouveau art and culture can be seen. The north of Paris is an interesting place where it gets very hilly and where you can climb to the top of the hill on which the Sacré-Cœur can be found, the Basilica du Sacré-Cœur. That's a beautiful, somewhat bohemian area around it that you might want to explore. Along the Seine, of course, is the Musée du Louvre. Take your time there and try not to see everything. Just pick a few things. Because it is so huge that if you try to do it all, you're going to end up having this feeling that you haven't seen very much at all. And then, again, food. Try some of the French cheese. The beautiful thing about the way you travel on our ships is that we encourage you to bring some things along. We have no corkage fees. We like it if you have some time on the sun deck to try a picnic. Bring a baguette, bring some cheese, bring some charcuterie. You can do that any day as long as the weather is nice, to enjoy the ship in every which way you can. And of course, you can always have dinner in the dining room. That's what it's for. We host you there, but spend some time on your own with a good bottle of wine as well as you travel along the river. You then end up, that's the first major city that you visit, and it's not very big. This is Vernon, and what you see here is the tower of the Collegiate Church. It's a bit truncated, but it's a beautiful church on the inside. And from Vernon, we bring you to Monet's garden. Claude Monet, of course, was probably the most famous of all French Impressionists. It was a painting that he did that gave Impressionism its name. And he built a very large estate, almost you can say, where he planted all kinds of plants, flowers. He created a pond with a little Japanese bridge. And all of this had one function only. He wanted to sit in his own backyard and paint. Paint colors, paint forms, paint shapes. And of course, these paintings have made their way into museums all over the world. And to walk across that little bridge or to just see the enormous abundance of flowers is really kind of walking in his footsteps. It's almost better than his paintings. This slide shows you a monument on Utah Beach. And I'd like to pause here for a moment to explain just what makes this itinerary so unique. Over the next 3 days, you have an opportunity to tailor-make the time that you spend on the Normandy beaches to your own liking through a series of included and optional excursions. On this day, for instance, you can travel to the Utah Beach Landing Museum and to Sainte-Mère-Église. It's in that village that a paratrooper got stuck with his parachute on the church steeple. You may have seen this in the movie The Longest Day. Then you travel to Pointe-du-Hoc, a very steep cliff that was heavily fortified by the Germans and that got pockmarked with grenades, explosions that happened on the days leading up to D-Day. Army Rangers eventually managed to scale the cliff and occupy the position. And then at the end of this day, you also visit a German military cemetery at La Combe, where 21,000 German soldiers were laid to rest. The highlight, of course, of any visit, and that's the next slide, of the Normandy beaches is the American cemetery in Colville-sur-Mer. This is where 9,300 American soldiers are resting. It overlooks Omaha Beach, which is another one of the beaches, of course, that you will visit. And again, this is where you can be creative and mix and match as you see fit. Finally, and that's the next slide, that is a monument on Juno Beach. We also have an optional excursion that allows you to spend time on what is often referred to as the Commonwealth beaches, Juno Beach, but also Pegasus Bridge, which in the very early hours of June 6th was where British soldiers managed to successfully complete the first combat operations of the day by occupying that very important bridge. The cemetery at Colville-sur-Mer can be visited as part of an overland excursion. What we do here is we bring you off the ship and you spend the night near the beaches so that you can optimize your time. On this 2-day program, you will also visit the museum, the Debarkation Museum in Arromanches, and that's the next slide, where in the wake of the D-Day landings, a harbor was built made of pontoons, and the museum here tells the story of that harbor, but also of the initial assault on June 6th. I would be somewhat tempted to say, meanwhile, back at the ship, this is what you would see. And of course, on the left-hand side, that is still in Vernon. That half-timbered building there in the center of the picture is actually what's left of a bridge across the Seine here. And on the right-hand side, that is the square where Jeanne d'Arc, that national heroine of France, got burnt at the stake during some rather nasty politicking between the British and the French king and the Burgundians that were also a force still to be reckoned with. Rouen is, of course, also, and you see that on the next slide on the left-hand side, the city of that magnificent cathedral, that Gothic cathedral that was painted by Claude Monet. Not once, not twice, but more than 30 times. Monet had a studio across the street from the cathedral, and he painted the cathedral during all kinds of times of day to just play with the colors. That was what Monet was so fascinated by. And then on the right-hand side here, you see a bust of the that's in the church that now takes the location of the square where Jeanne d'Arc got put to death. The next day, you find yourself in Les Andelys, and overlooking Les Andelys is Château Gaillard. That was a fortress built in 1196 by Richard the Lionheart. Richard, of course, was the King of England, but also the Duke of Normandy. Normandy switched between England and France a number of times in the course of history. In 1204, so only a few years after Richard the Lionheart had built Château Gaillard, it was taken over by Philippe II, the King of France at the time, and it was never given up after that. It was a perfect location, and for a while, for those few years that Richard was able to fend off the French, it was considered a fortress that could not possibly be conquered. History, of course, showed otherwise. Then, as you get closer to Paris, you will dock in Le Pec, and from Le Pec we have an excursion that takes you to Château Malmaison, which is where Napoleon spent his latter days. You also have an opportunity from here to visit the Palace of Versailles. One of my favorites, also one of my wife's favorites. She likes when we go into the gardens and we rent a little boat, and I row her around the gardens, and we have the chateau in the background. One of my favorite places. One of hers too. And then after your stop in Le Pec, you're back in Paris, where your voyage ends. We hope, of course, that you travel some more with us on one of our optional extensions. Spend more time in Paris. You would have time to do an evening cruise on the Seine, to visit the Louvre, to perhaps walk across the Pont d'Alexandre, which is the next slide. That's probably my favorite bridge across the Seine. And this is the post-extension package, 3 nights in Paris, where you can do more of the City of Lights. This is, again, on the left-hand side, this is the Pont d'Alexandre, one more time with a view of the Eiffel Tower. And on the right, that doesn't need any further commentary, that's just breakfast. We also offer the opportunity to travel to Lille and Bruges. This is a 4-night extension, and it focuses on the battlefields in northern France and in Belgium of World War I. You visit the Museum of the Somme in northern France. You visit Flanders Fields near the city of Ypres. And this is a view of Bruges. Bruges is just a beautiful medieval town. It's a combination, this extension, of battlefields and medieval architecture, if you will, medieval art and architecture. Lille, on the next slide, is also a beautiful city that has been partially restored, partially preserved. These cities, as you can imagine, saw a lot of fighting. And then on the right-hand side is one of the beautiful courtyards, again, of Bruges in this case. So I think a very nice balance between the history of the very early 20th century and centuries of history in these magnificent cities of Flanders and of northern France. And then finally, we also have the possibility to spend a few nights in Brussels, not just NATO headquarters or the headquarters of the European Union, but really very much a Renaissance city in its own right, with this beautiful, magnificent Grand Place and everything around it. Great food, lively cafes, a patchwork, really. Brussels has not seen great city planning. So right next to these beautiful Renaissance buildings, you may find something that's not quite to your liking that was put there in the 1960s. But just such an interesting, such a colorful city that I cannot recommend highly enough. And with these options at the end of your journey, to extend it a little bit, to make your, if you will, your air dollars go a little further by spending more time in Europe, ends my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, and we hope to see you. And just in case, if you haven't booked it for 2024, we've decided, because we saw that the demand was very large, that this itinerary will be continued in 2025 and in 2026. And we hope to see you there.